Got a lot of requests after our last seminar to record the next one, this one, which we are doing. And I want to let everyone know that it will be available on our website. That's vAuto.com. Under the Tools and Resource section of our website, it will be there, I'm told, this Wednesday. So if anyone wants to listen to it again or have others listen to it, you're welcome to do that from the vAuto website. What we're going to talk about today is pixel management, and what I've come to understand about success in the used car business today is that it's much more complex and challenging than it once was. What we have to do as operators today in order to be successful is much more varied than what it once was. And to that point, there was a period of time where it really was not so clear to me what all had to be done, and therefore I went around the country dutifully selling software with a certain promise that if dealers simply did as I asked them to do, and that is to stock their lots a little bit differently than they might have done in the past, think about what to pay for them a little bit different, and price them a little bit different, that they could expect to see a measure of sustainable performance improvement. And in fact, sometimes that did occur, but in other cases it did not occur, and that obviously was a big problem for me because I take what I do very personally, and I don't want to be taking anyone's money if it won't really help them. So that problem that I had led me on a journey that ultimately concluded, well, didn't conclude, I'm still on it, but ultimately led me to the writing of my second book, which is called Velocity 2.0, Paint, Pixels, and Profitability. And the premise of the second book is that in order to be successful and profitable in used car operations, you have to do many things right, from what I call paint to pixels. Now, when I talk about the paint, and we've talked about this on previous seminars, what I'm talking about are having the right cars owned for the right money at the right price. But again, even if you're successful in achieving that, it's not enough until you have the second bookend in place, which I call pixel proficiency, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But unfortunately, even if you have those critical bookends of paint and pixel proficiency, in between those bookends, you still obviously have to have a very good sales process. But if you are successful in creating the right conditions on the paint side of your business, right cars, right price, right money, and the right pixel side, that which we're going to talk about today, and a good sales process in between, the results that you can expect at your dealership will be truly transformative. So to begin talking about pixel proficiency, what I've come to understand is that there are many obstacles for dealers that is preventing them from being truly pixel proficient. And one of the obstacles, simply stated, is that it is a very complex environment. I mean, everyone comes to you as dealers today with everything under the sun imaginable, you know, in the area of internet, products, tools, services, and the promise of so many of these is that if you just use them, you'll be successful. And I think we all understand in the car business today that there's no panacea like that. If anyone ever comes to you with any product, you know, and says, this is it, just use this, you'll be successful, it's probably a fallacy. The only thing that ultimately produces sustainable results is a proper strategy well executed. So it requires a strategy, it requires people, it requires process. And somewhere in between there, you know, between people and process, there might be some tools, but they're just that. They're just tools. The stars of the show for success are the execution of a good strategy, and that means people and process. So, you know, it's a complicated environment, this web. And one of the problems is that, you know, we really can't see our virtual merchandise online as clearly as we can see it on the lot. When we talk about virtual marketing of used vehicles, we're talking about having our vehicles displayed across many different sites and many different pages of those sites, and it just isn't very easy to get your head around how well those vehicles are displayed. If you looked at your used vehicle lot and that lot was a mess, you know, cars were parked crooked, sideways, missing from the front line, I can assure you nobody would go home tonight until that condition was straightened out. But again, that's very easy to see. It's very observable in its physical realm, but in the virtual realm it's very different, and that's obviously one of the disconnects that makes it most challenging for us to be as proficient as we need to be. And then the second really primary challenge is that it's just darn complicated. As I mentioned, everyone comes to you with everything under the sun, and there are only so many tools and disciplines that you can focus your time and money on and be good at. So what I'm going to show you here is a simplified framework that helps me think about the internet tools and products that I'm currently or prospectively considering. And I think that it's fair to say that you could take all these tools and to slot them into one of these three buckets. The first one being the likes of the online classified advertising sites, the auto traders and cars.coms of the world. The second category is the whole SEO, SEM game about buying keywords and phrases and long tail words and phrases. And then the third group is the newest to the mix, and it's the whole social media thing. And I think that anything you use today or in the future, you could properly and broadly speaking put into one of these three categories, and that just sort of helps me and perhaps you in terms of thinking about, you know, where you're placing your bets and applying your time and focus and money. But I think it would be reasonable for all of us to agree that of these three categories, the one that we've been at the longest, the one that we've spent the most amount of money on to date of these three categories would be our merchandising on the online classified advertising sites, the auto traders and cars.coms of the world. This is a medium that we've been working as car dealers at for the better part of a decade and spent hundreds of thousands and in some cases millions of dollars to become proficient. So it would be very easy and natural to assume that of these three categories, this is the one that we would have pretty well nailed down and buttoned up and be pretty proficient at, allowing us to refocus ourselves and on becoming proficient and present in the other two categories. The only problem with that presumption is that it would be dead wrong. Dead wrong. What I've come to understand is that that medium called online classified advertising, the one that we've been at for decades and spent hundreds or millions of dollars on, is actually our performance on these sites is pretty deplorable. And I realize that's kind of a harsh and strong statement, but what I'm going to do is present a case to you that really suggests why that is the case. And the first reason that I know it to be true is that suspecting it was true, I created a software tool called Virtual View, which what you see on the screen is a representation of that. And what this essentially does is it allows a dealership user to have a virtual view of their virtual display with some degree of clarity similar to what they have on their physical lot. And what I'd like everyone to understand is that every single time I turn this tool on for any dealership, even those dealerships that are touted as being the best internet dealers in their communities or in their nation, it is always a mess. I mean, it's always a mess. What you see on this screen is the ability to check off the third-party sites that you advertise on, and then the system goes to work and it audits these sites essentially and says to you, okay, you know, here's what's wrong. For example, on some sites you'll have cars that have been in your inventory for very long that just aren't on that site at all. They never made it there. Or if they did make it there, it took them a long time, too long to make it. Or if they made it there, they're there without a price, or they're there without an odometer, they're there without descriptions, or they're without photos. And the first tenet of pixel proficiency that I've come to understand is that your virtual display has to stand as tall as you would expect your physical display to be. And that is just quite simply never the case. As I mentioned, every time we turn this tool on for any dealer, it's just deplorable. And it's understandable why it's that way. Because trust me when I tell you, what you can't see is very difficult to audit and to manage. And with the virtual inventory being in that sort of realm of not being very visible or observable, it gets neglected. And I can assure you that no matter how good you think you are in your internet marketing, until and unless your virtual display stands as tall as you would expect your physical display to be, there's no way that you can expect any sort of internet presence to return as it should return to justify the dollars that you're spending and to justify the business that you're in. So I think it's terribly important for everyone in the industry just to understand the criticality of this. Now, one of the frustrations that I have that I'll share with you is that typically when I want to have a discussion with a dealer or a general manager or a used car manager about the condition of their used vehicle inventory in the virtual realm, quite often they want to redirect me to their internet department. And with all due respect, while I really love and admire and respect the internet people, I really don't care much for the internet department, because to me that suggests that every other department in the dealership isn't the internet department. And that's absolutely false. I mean, every department today is the internet department. And if you have any degree of responsibility for used car performance because your title is used car manager or sales manager or GM or owner, and you don't think that you own the responsibility for how well your vehicles display themselves and your inventory presents itself on the internet, then very respectfully I would say that you really don't understand used car management in the 21st century. You see, I'm not having an internet discussion here with all of you today. What I'm having is a used car management, a 21st century used car management discussion. So, you know, again, no one's eyes in the used car business should glaze over with this conversation. This is the essence of used car success today. And another fallacy that have come to understand is that dealers incorrectly assume that certain websites don't work. You know, I didn't get a return from that website. Well, guess what? You shouldn't expect to get a return from any third-party website until and unless you, as the operator of that dealership, take responsibility first and foremost for certain conditions, and the first one being the physical presence of your inventory, standing very tall. The notion that, you know, sites like Cars.com and Auto Trader don't work is absolutely nonsense. What's not to work? After all, they're just marketplaces. They have a gazillion, you know, consumer eyeballs. Why wouldn't that work? What would be about it that wouldn't work? Well, you know, what doesn't work is when we as dealers don't understand what we're responsible for, and the first condition of pixel proficiency is absolutely an expectation and a reality that our used car inventory stands as tall in the virtual realm as it does on the physical lot. Okay, so we can all sort of get our heads around that and accept it, even though it's seldom ever the case. We can sort of get past that, I think. But to sort of demonstrate in a more meaningful way why I've come to the conclusion that in that first category of online classified advertising, you know, we're pretty deplorably bad and not anywhere near realizing our full potential, is that, you know, I'd like to put a test to you all listening here on this seminar, and the test is this. I ask you rhetorically the following questions. First, you know, did you spend money advertising on a classified advertising site last month like a Cars.com or Auto Trader? And I would imagine that most of you would say yes. The second question I would ask you is, do you think you spent a lot of money to do that? And I'm certain that most all of you would say, yes, we did spend a lot of money. And I would say, okay, great. Then I've got a couple questions to ask you. And the questions are as follows. Number one, for the month that just concluded, the month of August 2010, how many of you could answer the following question? How many search result pages did you get from any one of those major sites that you spent all that money to advertise on? Another question, how many vehicle detail page views did you get on one of those sites? And very respectfully to the audience, I would say that if you cannot answer those questions for the month that concluded, I would say that if you can't answer those questions month to date for the present month, then with all due respect, you have no business writing a check of the nature and the size that you've been writing to the third-party companies. Because as I'll demonstrate, without knowledge of and without control over some of the most basic metrics that those sites produce, I would say that you're not in a position to make any sort of informed judgment as to whether you're spending your money wisely or completely throwing it away. And let me explain what I mean by this. First, I'd like to define in simplest terms what I just asked you, search result pages, SRPs, and vehicle detail pages, VDPs. Let me define those terms, then you'll understand why it's so critical to understand what those numbers are. A search result page is this. If a consumer goes to a site like an Auto Trader or Cars.com, they're prompted to type in their zip code and the type of car they're interested in. So if somebody typed in their zip code and they typed in Chevy Tahoe, you know, they might get 8 pages of Chevy Tahoes returned to them. Now, every page contains a number of vehicles. On Auto Trader, it's 25, and on Cars.com, it's 50. And if your vehicle appears as one of many, let's say on page 5, but that internet shopper only looks at page 1, 2, 3, and 4, you don't get credit for what's called an SRP, a search result page. You don't get credit for an SRP until and unless they get to page 5, that page that contains your vehicle is either one of 25 or one of 50. And if they do get to that page, then you do get credit for a search result page or an SRP. Now, if they happen to find your vehicle as one of 25 or 50 on that page to be of such great alignment to their needs, wants, interests, such that they'll actually click on your vehicle to the exclusion of the other 24 or 49, and they drill down on it, and the page expands, and they see all of your photos, and they see all of your descriptions, that's what's called a vehicle detail page, a VDP. Now, the first point that I want to make here to all of you on these SRPs and VDPs is this. Until you get a VDP, nothing of any value occurred for you on that site. For all the money you spent, nothing of any value occurred for you on that site. Until a shopper gets to a VDP on your car, all of your presence and all of its glory on that site has zero value whatsoever. The VDP is the money metric. And in fact, I want to let you know that today I can document for you that there is a mathematical relationship between the number of VDPs the dealership gets on its used vehicles and the number of used vehicles that they retail every month. You see, when I was researching and writing Velocity 2.0, Paint, Pixels, and Profitability, one of the things I did is I took 100 of our vAuto clients randomly, so I was sure to get a sampling of every market and size and type of dealer. Took 100 dealers across the country, and I tracked several of their key internet metrics along with their retail used car production over a period of 13 months. And every month, month in, month out, without fail, the dealers that got the fewest number of VDPs sold the fewest number of used cars. The dealers that got the largest number of VDPs consistently sold the largest number of used cars. In fact, there was not a single month across those 100 dealers over the 13 months where one of those dealers sold more than 100 retail units without generating a minimum of 10,000 vehicle detail page views. So you see there's a mathematical relationship between VDPs and the number of used cars you sell. Now let me explain why that relationship in fact exists. You know, if you stop and think about it, the sites like Cars.com and Auto Trader, you know, roughly have about 1.5 million used vehicles for sale on them at any given time. Well, stop and think about what the odds are that a shopper is going to land on a page that contains your vehicle as one of 25 or 50. I mean, the odds of that happening are pretty low, very low statistically. And then consider the further low odds of them actually picking your vehicle off of that page is one that they are most interested in drilling down on, looking at all the photos, thinking about, considering, pondering. Think about the odds of that. I mean, literally, when that happens, it's like having a golden needle pulled out of a haystack. Literally, your vehicle, by operation of that search engine and the mind of the shopper working together, excluded 1,499,000 other vehicles in favor of yours. Now stop and think about it. Is it really too hard to understand that the more times that occurs, the more times people are going to show up at your front door or call your switchboard with very qualified interest on a specific vehicle that you currently have in stock? Would it be a great leap for me to say to you that if I delivered 100 people like that, you know, highly qualified interest people on specific vehicles you own to your front door, is it reasonable to assume that you'd close about 40 to 50% of those people? You know that's true. Well, this is what and how these online classified advertising sites work. In fact, generating VDPs is all that they're capable of doing for you. And the more VDPs they generate, as I mentioned, the more people show up at your doorstep or call your switchboard with intent, very qualified intent, on a specific vehicle. So that's what these sites are designed to do. Now, if you stop and think about that, that's a little bit of a disconnect. It's a really big disconnect, in fact, because we've been advertising and concentrating on these third-party websites for decades, and very, very, very few dealers can ever report how many VDPs they got from that site in any given month. And really, if you can't cite how many VDPs you got, how do you know that you didn't get any at all? I mean, quite possibly, it's not likely, but quite possibly, you know, you might have gotten zero, and you've written those checks month in, month out, getting zero, and not understanding the most basic fundamentals of how third-party online classified sites are designed to work. That's all they can do for you is to deliver VDPs. Now, honestly, how do we get ourselves a decade into this medium and not have an appreciation for that being all that they're capable of delivering, and consequently having no clue as an industry month to month, week to week, how many VDPs we've gotten? I mean, we honestly have to come to a realization that we've been spending all of our money at this medium with little more than a hope and a prayer. You know, this notion that we wrote the check, the big check, and we sent it off to these guys, and now we've done our job, it's time for them to deliver, quite frankly, couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, what we have to realize is that when we write those big checks to these third-party companies, all we're doing is paying to get in the game. And if you don't understand the game, you don't understand the rules of the game, you're not willing to play the game, you're not good at playing the game, do yourself a really big favor and save the money. Don't write the check. And you know, how playing the game, as I've mentioned, begins with your responsibility, not theirs, but yours, of making sure that your virtual display is standing as tall as you would expect your physical display. And secondly, you have to keep track of some very critical metrics. Now, there are many metrics that are well worthwhile tracking, but what I want everyone to realize is that at a minimum, there are three. And very respectfully, again, I would say to you that if you're not willing, capable, or able of managing to measure these three metrics, not month to month any longer, but week to week, then I would say, you know, you're really not in a good position to be writing that check. And two of those three metrics that you have to keep track of week to week are the number of SRPs and VDPs you get. And I'll talk about the third one in just a moment, but you know, SRPs essentially are the virtual equivalent of drive-bys. Would you ever think about operating your dealership, you know, not being aware of the traffic on your street? Would you think that if the traffic on your street precipitously inclined or increased or decreased, that might have some effect on your business? Well, of course. Well, does it occur to you for all the money that you spend on the online advertising that maybe you ought to keep track on the traffic that's driving by your inventory on search result pages as a proxy or an indicator for how effective that site is being for you? Of course, you need to. And then secondly, VDPs, I'd like you all to think about is being the functional equivalent of walk-ins. It's like somebody coming in off that virtual street because they spotted something that they saw as they drove by, pulling into your lot, and saying, you know, give me the keys. I'd like to take a closer look at that one. I mean, what would we call that in the traditional dealership? We would call that an up or a walk-in. Would we ever think about running our dealership without counting or measuring walk-ins? Would it occur to us that if the number of walk-ins or ups, you know, precipitously increased or decreased, that might be something that we would want to talk about, we'd want to try and figure out? Well, of course you would. Well, this is essentially the same thing that's happening every day with respect to these third-party sites. Your SRPs and VDPs are constantly fluctuating, and as I'm going to reveal here to you shortly, there are things that you have responsibility for. There are things that you can and should be doing because, believe it or not, you actually determine largely how many SRPs and VDPs you get. But obviously you can't manage that until you begin to measure it. So measuring week-to-week SRPs and VDP fluctuation is the first critical step. And these metrics are available to you on the back end of sites like Cars.com and Auto Trader, as well as on vAuto. So once we understand that VDPs are the money metric, they're the only end result of any value whatsoever for being on those sites, then we need to turn our attention to how is it that you, the dealer, not the third-party site provider, actually has the control of how many VDPs you get. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss with you two strategies for driving more VDPs. However, I want to tell you that of the two strategies, while they're both very, very critical, the first strategy is not a particularly high leverage one. The second strategy has a tremendous amount of leverage attached to it. As you'll come to see, again, they're both critical, but the second strategy is really quite exciting because if it's understood and it's used properly, any dealership can take their online investment on a third-party classified advertising site and really just jack it up. So let's first talk about the one that is not so leveraged but no less important, and that is this. You cannot get a VDP until you get an SRP. I mean, that's pretty obvious. There's no car to click to drill down on until your car appears on a page among many others. Well, as you see on this screen here, there is a certain art to having your vehicle display itself on a search result page in such a way where you are likely to get the drill down, the VDP, as opposed to your competitor. And in fact, what I've come to understand is that there are essentially 4 things that you can do, you must do, in order to set your vehicle up for that possibility, as high percentage as possible. And the first one, as unexciting as it is to talk about, is your selection of that little thumbnail photo. Now, I have to tell you that it would bring a tear to your eye if you looked at the page after page, the thousands of vehicles on these third-party classified advertising sites, looked at those little thumbnail photos and came to the realization, that you will, that nobody gave any thought whatsoever to which little thumbnail photo appeared on that page. Now, you know, I'm sorry to have a conversation with you, very busy, you know, people, about a little thumbnail photo, but if you don't appreciate the fact that this is one of 4 things that you can do, one of only 4 things you can do to get your vehicle drilled down on for VDP, then I would say to you, if you don't appreciate the need to pay close attention to that, then do yourself a big favor and save the money. Don't bother advertising this medium because, again, until you get to VDP, absolutely nothing of any value happens. And again, just to rant a little bit more on this point, when I want to have a discussion with a dealer or a GM or a UCM about the selection of the thumbnail photos, it couldn't be the furthest thing from your mind. You know, it just isn't what you're focused on. And again, I say to you, spend a lot of money being on these sites for a VDP, and if you don't want to take responsibility for it, then do yourself a favor, don't spend the money. Now, I'm not saying that you as the owner or the GM or even the UCM have to select the item, the photo of the many that appears on the SRP page as the thumbnail, but you know, you need to take responsibility for it. The second of the 4 items is the price. I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time talking about how the price affects your ability to get a VDP, but suffice it to say it's very important. The third item that most dealers or used car managers or GMs aren't even familiar with is something that I call their photo bait. It's kind of like the worm on the hook. And you'll notice here it says there are 24 photos and video. Now, it just never ceases to amaze me that dealers will spend thousands of dollars every month on these third-party websites to get their inventory there, but then where they choose to draw the line on their expense control is by limiting the number of photos that they're willing to put up, or by limiting the quality of the photos that are being taken for expense concern. And while I do completely understand the need to be very cost conscious and expense focused, is this really where you want to draw that expense line? I mean, if you're going to spend thousands of dollars to get your cars to the site, for what? For VDP, and then you don't want to give people the best opportunity to evaluate those vehicles such that you might get the VDP or you might get the walk-in or the telephone call, then honest to God, reevaluate why you'd spend the money at all. And, you know, for most, well, let me put it this way, for buying a car or shopping for a car on a third-party classified advertising site is kind of an impersonal medium. And buying a used car is an emotional purchase. So for most people, the way to their emotion is through their eyeballs, and these photos become very, very critical. But again, it never ceases to amaze me of how dealers, in the name of expense control, will say, no, I won't have the maximum number of photos, or I'm not going to invest the money to have my photos that I do put up there be of the highest quality. I mean, really, folks, that is not the place to draw the expense line if you're going to advertise on these third-party sites. So the fourth item for getting more VDPs is something that applies to Auto Trader, and it's what they call their seller's notes. And on Auto Trader, they allow you the opportunity on the SRP page to put an abbreviated description. Now, depending on what package you subscribe to, it allows you either 100 or 250 characters of description. But here's the problem. The problem is that if you, the used car manager or GM or owner, don't take specific responsibility for what goes in that field, they take care of it for you. And the only way that they're capable of taking care of it for you is to put the first 150 to 250 characters of a standard VIN explosion. Now, do you understand what sort of compelling features are described in the first 150 to 250 characters of a VIN explosion? I mean, it's really interesting features about your vehicle, such as power windows, power brakes, power steering, air conditioning, automatic transmission. That's the type of stuff that comes up at the front of a standard VIN explosion. That's the sort of stuff that gets dropped into the seller's notes field. Now, stop and think about that. These seller's notes are some of the most valuable frontline real estate you own, albeit virtual. It's frontline, expensive, used car real estate. And it would bring a tear to your eye to flip through the pages and pages of cars thinking about the thousands of dollars that dealers spend to get their cars there, and they're willing to let those cars go up there for the purpose of getting a VDP by doing what? By allowing a standard VIN explosion detail to go in there. I mean, it's completely irresponsible. It's completely ridiculous. If you're not willing to take control of that, again, I have to say, do yourself a favor and save your money. Don't choose to advertise in this medium at all, because you cannot expect these sites to deliver results unless we, as the operators, understand what conditions have to exist for that marketplace to work. And having vehicles that present themselves stellar with photos and descriptions and photo bait, this is the art of getting your vehicle from an SRP to a VDP, and until you get to a VDP, nothing of any value has occurred for you. Now, I apologize for having sort of ranted on this point, but please, folks, we've been at this medium for the better part of a decade now. We spend hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, and there's really just no excuse any longer to have our vehicles appear on these pages in the conditions they do. Or if you're willing to allow that to happen, please save your money, don't be there at all. So, if you do a good job, if you do a really nice job and you develop mastery of selecting, great thumbnail photos out of many, and you got good prices and you got good seller's notes, what can you expect in terms of conversion of SRPs to VDPs? Well, if you do it correctly, you can expect 3 to 4%. That's what our industry has showed us, is that if you do it right, for every 100 times your vehicle is viewed on an SRP by a shopper, if you do it well, you might get a VDP 3 to 4% of the time. But the fact that probably most of you listening to the seminar today could not accurately report what your SRP to VDP conversion ratio it was for August, what it is month to date for September of 2010, suggests to me, once again, that you're not in possession of the most basic metrics that allow you to determine whether that check that you sent off is being well applied or not. So I had mentioned earlier that there are 3 metrics that are absolutely at a minimum essential to track from month to month and week to week. The first one being your SRPs, second being your VDPs, and the third being your conversion of SRPs to VDPs. And what I would like to ask you to think about as a benchmark is that if your VDP to SRP conversion is less than 3%, there's absolutely work that needs to be done. And obviously, for the amount of money you spend to be on these sites, every little bit that you can get that up, if you can get it up to 3.5%, 4%, sometimes it will go above 4%, that is greater return for the money that you're spending on the sites. So again, these are things that are under the dealer's control, not under the third-party website provider's control, although it is their responsibility through their people, their consultants, to work with you to have you understand the importance of these metrics and to help teach your people the tools and techniques of making sure that you're getting proper VDP conversion. But suffice it to say, if you're operating today at 2%, and through some really hard work and effort and assistance from your advertising consultants, you get that up from 2 to 4%, well, that's 100% improvement. But still, you're only going in absolute nominal terms from 2 out of every 100 to 4 out of every 100. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not minimizing the importance of that. It's absolutely critical, but 100% improvement would only take you from 2 to 4, and again, it's important, but it's not hugely leveraged. So let's turn our consideration now to the second technique for which you can control the number of VDPs you get. And this one was pretty fascinating how it came to my attention. Often are the times that I travel to markets and I find same dealership in that market. When I say same dealership, the same brand dealership. Perhaps go to market, find 3, 4 dealerships. 3, 4 dealerships in the same market, all advertising on the same third-party website, only to find out that there is a vast variance between the number of SRPs. Now I'm talking about SRPs, the number of SRPs that each one of the 3 dealerships get. Sometimes a dealership will get 25,000 SRPs in a month. The same brand Ford dealership in that same market might get 250,000, and then you'll find another Ford dealership 10 miles away that got 1.5 million SRPs. Now stop and think about that. Now, SRPs are not the money metric, but just imagine what would be the case if each one of these 3 dealerships converted SRPs into VDPs at the same minimal rate of 3%. You know what we're talking about in terms of difference of traffic that site is delivering to these 3 different stores of the same brand in the same market, advertising on the same sites? It's unbelievable. So one of the things that I do regularly now is I'll speak to groups. Like I'm going to show you a 20 group, a slide of a 20 group. In this particular 20 group, which happens not to be an extreme example, but a very typical one, you'll see in this group the range of SRPs, you know, on the low side maybe from 25,000 up to maybe 150,000. These happen to be Chevrolet dealers from various different places in the country, and this is a relatively small range of SRPs, but this happens every single time I go into a market as I see the same brand dealers, you know, just miles apart, advertising on the same sites with very different SRPs. And again, if they just converted the same ratio, you're talking about a lot of different results from advertising on the same site. So that happened to be pretty fascinating and troubling to me. So I went to Auto Trader and met with Chip Perry and asked him to please help me understand what would account for the differences in SRP attainment. And he helped me understand this, and it's time now that the industry understand it. What I've come to learn is that there are essentially 5 factors that determine how many SRPs the dealership gets. And remember, VDPs are the only money metric, but if we can teach you how to control conditions that drive SRPs, and you can reasonably convert SRPs into VDPs, now what we're really doing is taking that advertising medium and putting it on steroids. So the 5 factors that influence the number of SRPs a dealership gets are as follows. Number 1 is what I call screen real estate. Now, Google is worth what it's worth in the marketplace because they've demonstrated the value on where you appear on a search. In the case of Auto Trader and others, you often control that by which package you buy or not buy. So it is a decision you make to increase or improve your position, your screen real estate, or not. But that is the first one. The second one is the number of vehicles you have in inventory. Now, it's just pure math. The more vehicles that you have in inventory, the more likely it is mathematically that your vehicle will appear on a page. The third factor is your price. I think that goes without saying. Most dealers understand how their pricing today in the form of a sort will determine how many SRPs they get. The fourth factor is something that I've come to understand dealers don't really understand it at all, or very little if they understand it, is what I call the appeal of your inventory. Now, when I talk about the appeal of your inventory, what I'm talking about is the alignment between the types of cars that you have on your used vehicle lot right now and the types of cars that people are searching for with most frequency on those third-party sites. So do you think that maybe that might be something worth considering? You know, if you have a lot full of a certain type of car or heavily concentrated in a certain type of car, maybe one third-party website has more shoppers for that type of car than another. Might that be of interest to you when you think about which site you advertise on? I would think so. And even to take this appeal of your inventory concept one step further, what I've come to understand is some of the highest performing dealers in the country today are stocking their lots, not just based on cars that have low market day supplies, but cars that have what are called the high scarcity index. Or in the case, that's the terminology in Auto Trader terms. In Cars.com, it's called car stars. These are rankings that these sites are providing dealers that show them which vehicles are being searched for with the highest degree of frequency. And some most efficient, intelligent, successful operators actually going out purposely to go out and stock their lot full of cars that are most frequently being searched for on those most common websites in their markets. What a concept. You know, engineering your inventory to the needs and the desires and the demands of your market. And then the fifth factor is simply the number of active shoppers that that site is able to generate in your market for that given month. But what I'd like everyone on the seminar to appreciate is this, that 4 of those 5 factors, the first 4 out of the 5 factors are conditions that you, the dealer, control, not the third-party website. So again, this concept that we wrote the big check and we sent it off to those guys and now, we expect them to perform, it just couldn't be further from the truth. If you're not willing to take control of and manage those 4 conditions that you can manage in order to get the most amount of SRPs, to get VDPs, to get highly qualified people showing up at your front door to sell cars, then once again, I say to you, don't understand the game that you're in, and it's a very expensive one to play if you don't understand. So the next thing I want to do is I want to take this list of 5 down to 3. I want to obviously remove the one for which you have no control, and that's the number of active shoppers, but I also want to remove one that even though you do control, I don't suggest you try controlling for the purpose of getting SRPs, and that's the number of vehicles you have in inventory. I don't think that dealers should ever increase the number of vehicles in inventory for any purpose, certainly not to drive SRPs, not even to sell more cars. The only proper justification for increasing your inventory is to regulate your turn. If you get your turn up as high as many velocity dealers are doing today of 17 or 18 turns, then unless you're space or capital constrained, you should be prepared to put some more vehicles on the lot. But short of that, you shouldn't do it for SRPs or anything else. And it is true that more cars on the lot will generate more SRPs. It's just pure math. Again, I would like to suggest that you don't do that for the purpose of generating an SRP. So that brings us down to 3 conditions that I'd like to ask you, the industry to manage in order to get the most amount of SRPs to VDPs to qualified walk-ins to sales. And they are as follows. Number 1, the package that you buy or decide not to buy. Number 2, the price on your vehicles. And number 3 is managing the appeal of your inventory as I previously defined, that being how well your vehicles are aligned to the types of vehicles that are being frequently searched for on those sites. So what I'm about to show you is what I call my pixel scoring system. I developed a pixel scoring system to allow me to evaluate you in terms of how effectively you manage those 3 conditions that allow you to get more SRPs, more VDPs, more qualified walk-ins, more sales. And I'm going to explain very quickly how I assign a dealership pixel points by using this particular Chevrolet 20 group. And I'd like you not to get overly hung up in how I do the pixel points. I can have plenty of discussion with you afterwards, but let me quickly review it. For screen real estate, and I'm going to use Auto Trader for the purpose of this example. If you purchase their most expensive premium position package, that which they call Premium Alpha, I give you 12 pixel points for your real estate positioning. If you subscribe to the next level down, which they call Premium, I give you 6 pixel points. If you subscribe to anything on Auto Trader less than that, I gave you 0 pixel points for real estate. Now, to be very clear, that doesn't mean that anything less than Premium isn't worth anything. We'll see in a moment if it is or isn't, but it's just the way I did my scoring system. For your pricing, I gave you 1 pixel point for every % of market of pricing below 100% you were in a given month. So in other words, if your average price to market was 98%, in August I would have given you 2 pixel points. If it was 97%, I would have given you 3 pixel points, and so on. If it was 100% or above, I'd give you no pixel points for pricing. And then for the appeal of your inventory, I used a number that Auto Trader calls their demand index. The demand index is a way of measuring in aggregate how your inventory aligns to what people are searching for on that site relative to other dealers in your community, and I gave you 1 pixel point for every 25 points of demand index over a baseline of 100. Now, with that method of assigning pixel points, I go back to this 20 group and I rank the dealers in the Chevrolet 20 group from best to worst based on pixel point attainment. So the ones in the green at the top got the largest number of pixel points. The ones in the yellow were in the mid-range. The ones in the red were on the low end of the range. So based on this pixel point scoring system, I should be able to predict how effective these dealers are in generating SRPs. The next slide is a bit of an eye chart, and I apologize for that, but all you really need to be concerned about on this next chart is the high correlation of colors, green to green, yellow to yellow, red to red. While it's not perfectly correlated, it's highly correlated, which essentially demonstrates that the pixel scoring system does in most cases accurately predict how effective a dealer will be in getting SRPs based on how effective they are in managing these three conditions. Now, at this point, it's still a little bit abstract, and you're probably wondering, well, how does this connect to you? Well, the next slide is really where it comes home to you, and I want to demonstrate this with the assistance of Susan. On this slide, what I did is I took these same Chevrolet 20 Group dealers. This time, however, I didn't rank them best to worst. I ranked them worst to best, and I didn't rank them on pixel points, but I ranked them on SRP attainment. Now, what I did here, because these 20 Group dealers were all in different markets, in each market having a different number of active shoppers in their market, which would affect the results, and each of these dealers having different size inventories, which would also affect the results, I wanted to normalize the comparison by removing those two factors, the number of active shoppers in each of their respective markets as well as their inventory count. So I took each one of their SRPs and divided it by the number of active shoppers in their market, and then divided it again by the number of units in their inventory so as to work those variables out of the comparison. So what we're left with here on this slide is the ranking worst to best based on what I call SRPs per. SRP per dealer, per active shopper and per vehicle and inventory. So of this group, the dealer that did the worst on Auto Trader in terms of generating SRPs was dealer S. And let's see if together we can begin to understand why they might have done so poorly. Well, what we can see here is for package, they got 0 points, which means that they did not subscribe to Auto Trader's Premium Alpha or Premium. Susan, for demand index, which is that representation of the alignment of their vehicles, the appeal of inventory, how many points did they get for demand index, Susan?
1.
1 point, and then they got 0 for price. So here's my question to the seminar participants. If you happen to have the profile of dealer S, and I could assure you that many of you do, and if I were your Auto Trader rep walking into your store and I said, hey, you know, I think that you ought to spend some more money with me, upgrade your package, my question to you is, would that be a wise investment on your part to do that? And I would hope that you would realize that the answer would be no. No. In fact, you should not upgrade your package. Now, why would that be? Well, it's that way because I would ask you, what would be the point to buy a louder bullhorn to more prominently announce to your market that you've got only mildly interesting inventory and, oh, by the way, it's really high priced? I mean, honest to God, why would you buy a bigger package to more prominently announce a message like that? In fact, I could even argue if you're committed to that inventory profile and that pricing profile, why would you even be on this site at all? Why would you expect this site to work? I mean, if you're spending money on this site, chances are you're going to conclude this site doesn't work. But again, it's not the site that doesn't work. What it is are the conditions for which you, the dealer, the operator, are responsible for. If those conditions aren't right, please don't expect that marketplace to work. But if the conditions are right, it will work. But you were making decisions about whether we should be on these sites, not be on these sites, do this package, do that package, without really unraveling the mystery of saying, wait a minute, what are the conditions that have to be in place, and what are my conditions, and are the conditions for which I'm responsible for that make that site work actually in alignment so as to allow that site to work? Let's take a look at the next dealer, Dealer G. Dealer G did the second worst in terms of SRP attainment. Let's see together if we can see why. Well, again, per package, they got 0, which means that they are a featured or featured plus or standard listing dealer in Auto Trader. For index, Susan, how many points did they get?
3.
3. So they have somewhat interesting inventory. And for price, how many price points, pixel points did I give them?
12.
12. Oh my gosh. Here's a dealer who's got fairly decent, interesting inventory to the market. He's got exceptionally aggressive pricing, and he did the worst. I'm the Auto Trader rep. I call on Dealer G, and I say, Dealer G, I think you ought to spend more money. If you're Dealer G, and many of you in this seminar today are, I would ask you what would be the right answer. Should you step up to a more expensive package? Well, I would hope most of you are saying yes, you should. Why? Well, because you have the inventory that your market's looking for and you have it exceptionally priced. You've got a great message. However, I would say to you that before we say yes to stepping up to that package, somebody should have asked a question first. They should have said, wait a minute, Dale, before I could tell you yes for sure, although it looks like they should, you need to tell me how this dealer, how effective this dealer is in converting SRPs into VDPs. Because what if this dealer converts at the substandard rate of 1%? Should he step up and buy a bigger package? No. You know, it would be like going out and spending a lot of money on a big advertising, radio, and newspaper campaign to bring a lot of people to your dealership. Oh, but the only problem is we don't have any salespeople or vehicles to sell them. I mean, it would be an exercise of frustration. But assuming that this dealer does convert at the minimal acceptable rate of 3%, the answer is absolutely yes, he needs a package. And let me give you a sense of what the real life situation is with this dealer. This is a Chevrolet dealer in the Houston market, and he's on the periphery of the market. He's at that part of Houston where the city sort of begins to turn into farmland. Now, in any and every advertising medium in Houston, Texas, it's an extremely noisy, competitive market, radio, newspaper, TV, and it's true for the internet. So here's a guy sitting on the periphery of the metro market with a fabulous message in terms of having the vehicles that his marketplace loves and having them super well priced. But you know what he's doing presently without a package? He's whispering. He's whispering to his market, a very noisy market, that he's got a good message. Nobody can hear that message. It's the unfortunate reality for this guy is that if you have a good message and you're in Houston, Texas, you have to step up and buy a louder bullhorn, or arguably save your money and don't be there at all, because a soft voice in a very noisy competitive market like Houston is just simply not going to get the job done. Now, you know, we could go on and on and on about talking about these various different metrics for these various different dealers, but I think that you're beginning to get the understanding that we can't just say these sites don't work. These sites do work. What's not to work? They have a gazillion consumer eyeballs, but they're not going to work as well for every dealer as they do for others, and what determines how well they work are conditions. These sites are just marketplaces. That's all they are. And as brutal as marketplaces tend to be, they're very elegant in terms of the fact that they're very predictable. And how they perform is going to be directly related to what conditions exist either on the ground or in the virtual environment of that market. So when you have the right conditions, and those conditions being the cars that that marketplace is craving for, you have them priced in the sweet spot of that market, and you have the appropriate sort of punch or oomph in that marketplace in terms of your prominence, which doesn't mean always to buy the highest one. If you're in a very small market, you might not need the biggest package that third-party website provides. But what you have to do is you have to lay out the conditions and look at these conditions and ask yourself then, am I ready to do certain things? Now, again, these conditions of your inventory profile, your pricing, and the different package configurations, these are dynamic, these are fluid, they're changing all the time. So I think that, you know, you should not think that you can make a decision that you're going to buy a certain package or advertise on a certain site and just assume that that decision that you make today for the right reasons is going to be necessarily correct next month or even next week. And that's why it's absolutely critical for you all, as you sit down in your used car management meetings, to talk about things that are going right and things that are going wrong. I mean, here we are, after all, in the middle of September of 2010, and it's very likely that dealerships across America are going to sit down and say, okay, you know, what's been working for us the first half of the month, what went right, what went wrong, and you're going to talk about, you know, the number of ups, the number of telephone calls, the number of demo rides, the number of TOs. Well, right in the mix of that discussion has to be, hey, what happened to our SRPs and our VDPs the first half of this month? How's it compared to the last month? What's happening to our SRP to VDP conversion? Are we up? Are we down? What are we doing about it? And as you ask these questions, what you're going to find is that they are telling of the results, and they're predictive of the results. And keep in mind that what drives the SRPs and VDPs and the VDP conversions are things under your control. So we as operators have to begin to understand that today it's not enough just to have the right cars owned for the right money at the right price. Sure, that's one bookend, but the other bookend is that we have to make sure that we use these third-party online classified advertising mediums that are not inexpensive. We have to be sure that we use them to their maximum potential, and that means that we as used car operators have to take responsibility for understanding what these conditions are, making sure that the conditions for success are in place, maintain themselves in place, and to be sure that the investments that we make on these third-party advertising sites are properly aligned to the conditions that we have existing on the ground. And for example, if the conditions on the ground get out of line, maybe we need to take a hiatus. Just temporarily call up our expenditures and until we can get the conditions in place. But when you do get them in place, these sites rock, they work. And what I've come to understand is that dealers, I should say, who have found the ability to influence their SRPs have absolutely changed the dynamics of their sales volume. I mean, dealerships that used to do 30, 40, 50 used cars a month are consistently doing 150, 250 used cars a month. But these same dealerships are ones that might have used to average 80, 100,000 SRPs a month that are now doing 1 million SRPs per month. There are dealers who are involved in this seminar today, and there's one who many of you might be familiar with in Peoria, Illinois, and that's Finish Line Ford. They average about 1.5 million SRPs per month. But let me tell you why they're able to get that sort of result. Think about the 4 factors that they control or are capable of controlling. Number 1, the package. They buy the premium package for every brand of used car, even though they're a Ford dealer. Now, I wouldn't blanket recommend that for every dealer unless you stock a sufficient quantity of those cars. But the second factor tells you that he does, or probably does, he's got 500 vehicles in inventory. And while I said that I don't think you should control inventory levels to drive SRPs, it does nevertheless have that effect. So if you take those first 2 factors that he controls, the package decisions, he buys them for every brand. He's got 500 cars in stock. His average price to market usually is about 88, 89%, so he consistently gets 11 to 12 pixel points for pricing. And then his demand index is off the charts high. It's over 200% because he actually goes out purposely to buy cars that have low market day supply and high scarcity index. So he takes 4 of those 5 factors in Peoria, Illinois, which I might add is not a large number of active shoppers relative to many other markets in the country, and by combining those 4 of those 5 factors together, he jacks his SRPs to 1.5 million. He does an unbelievable job converting SRPs into VDPs. He does it at a rate of over 4%. Sometimes up to 5% and occasionally even 6%, just off the charts. And what he's got is he's got a fire hose of people or traffic being sprayed on him by these third-party sites. They're coming literally from anywhere and everywhere because he's got all the pixel conditions in place. So again, it is time, ladies and gentlemen, to understand that this used car online classified advertising venue is not optional. It is part and parcel of inventory management. Merchandising used cars cannot any longer be thought of or conducted separately from traditional inventory management. They're one and the same. You have to understand as you do that they're not inexpensive, and they are highly, highly productive. But again, the level of their productivity is going to vary directly to how the conditions that exist in that virtual realm are aligned, and you are ones responsible for aligning them, keeping them in line, and certainly beginning by recognizing what they are. Now, I'm willing to take some questions, and I'm also willing to stay on the line beyond the scheduled time to answer questions. Susan, give me a time check, please.
We are at about 11:59 Central Time.
Okay. All right, and again, if anyone has to drop off, I completely understand that. This will be recorded and posted on our website at vAuto starting on Wednesday under the Tools and Resource section, but I'll be happy to stay on the line for a while longer and answer as many questions as I can. Susie, you want to go with questions there, please?
Certainly. Okay. First question comes from Bill Joyce. When you say 10,000 VDPs are required to sell 100 units, is it 10,000 in total between AutoTrader and Cars.com, or is it 10,000 per site?
Well, Bill, nice to hear from you. Thank you. First of all, I want to make a point that it is not good science to try and compare SRPs and VDPs, let's say from Cars.com to AutoTrader. Reason being is this, that conceptually they are the same things. However, the way that these sites count SRPs and VDPs is somewhat different. So the first point, Bill, I'd like to make in response to your question is please don't try and evaluate the worthiness of one of these sites versus the other by comparing, their respective SRPs and VDPs. I would suggest that you compare each of them against themselves, what we call, say, or call temporally over time, but not one against the other. But to answer your question specifically on the 10,000, and I want to also be clear on this, even if you get 10,000 VDPs in any form, any combination, it doesn't mean you will sell 100 cars. Because as I mentioned, you still have to do a lot of other things right, but I would say it's safe to say that in order to sell 100 cars, you have to have a minimum of 10,000 VDPs. And I would say, roughly speaking, it doesn't matter how you get them from site A or site B. The fact is that you have to get them. And the more VDPs you get, Bill, the more used cars you're going to sell. Next question, please.
Next question, similar from Jim Bell. Is it normal to be higher with Cars.com versus AutoTrader? I am always 1% higher with Cars.
Yep, and it's really interesting you say that, Jim, because that's my rule of thumb as well. For the reasons I stated, they count them slightly differently. The numbers in my experience are exactly that, about 1% higher. But again, it doesn't mean that one site performs better or worse than another. It's just that they count them slightly differently technically.
Okay, from John Pearson, what is the right amount of photos?
Well, the right amount of photos is as many as you can get there. I mean, again, buying a car is an emotional thing. The medium is inherently impersonal, and the way that you sort of connect the personal to the impersonal is through the photos. So, frankly, I would recommend that you, take as many photos as that site would allow you to put up there, and, video all the better. I mean, just make it as visually connective as possible. And again, it's not just the number, but it's also the quality of the photos. Next question, please.
We have a two-part from Steve Gerhardt. Number one, does vAuto description writer text push to the third-party sites as entered when using caps? And the second part of that is also, are you suggesting that to dominate your market, assuming you are doing a good job with thumbnails and etc., that you purchase the top-tier package from third-party vendors?
Well, okay, on the first question, that's a specific software question. I'm not sure I know the answer, but I think the description writer in vAuto does push, well, I know it pushes to all the third-party sites. Specifically about caps, I assume it pushes it the way that you've typed it or entered it is my presumption, but I'm not 100% sure, and we can get you a better answer on that. But as far as the second question is concerned, I would buy, if photos are sold in packages, quantity packages, yeah, I would buy the most expensive package. And I know it's easy to say, it's not my money, but again, that's, it's just the last mile. Why not go the last mile? But I'm clearly not saying, what I'm not saying is that you should buy the most expensive listing package that the site offers. That is a decision that is made only after I could understand, the basic conditions. How's your pricing? How's your appeal? How's your, how big is your market? Who else occupies that premium position? Now, I want to tell you that your reps from both AutoTrader and Cars.com are eager to have these discussions with you, and I will tell you this, that both of these companies over the past several years have gone a long way in working with their field reps to help these people, help you make decisions properly. And I can tell you with firsthand experience, both these companies, have told their reps, you know what, we can't just go out there and sell what we have to sell for the sake of our sales objectives. That dog isn't hunting anymore. You got to go out there and sell these dealers what they need, and don't sell them what they don't need. So, grab your Auto Trader or your Cars.com or whoever rep and just say, help me, work with me to get my SRPs and VDPs and VDP conversions up. That's what they're there to do. Next question, please, Sue.
Okay, this question references slide 35. The example of the description you used uses all caps. Are you better off using upper and lower case? That would make it easier to read than more effective.
Yeah, you know what? That's a question that I don't feel expert on. I would defer that question to the representatives of the third-party sites. They're much closer to that. They can tell you, I think, better than I can statistically what works. I guess, not being visual myself, I didn't realize that description's in all caps. It's a good question. I'm just not positive what that answer is. Sorry about that. Next question.
From Joshua Hirsch, how do we see SRP and VDP on Auto Trader? Where is this report?
Yeah, it's on both Cars.com and Auto Trader have a back end. Auto Trader is called Dealer Site, and it requires a username and login that each dealership has or should have. And I have to tell you, it's a tremendous resource. The information that's on the back end of those sites is so rich, and to understand it and to use it, on a weekly, daily basis in terms of understanding the vitals of your sales operation. It's terrible, that we're not, as an industry, more attuned with going there and understanding what's there. So if you don't know that site exists, or you don't know your username and password, get a hold of your rep, and they'll be happy to give it to you and acquaint you with it.
Next question is from Paul Leolios. Dale, would you elaborate on photo bait?
Yeah, photo bait is just a couple of words that appears on the SRP page that says that if you click down here, this is what you're going to see, and it shows you, or it tells you how many photos are down there and whether or not there's video. And again, when you scan an SRP page and you look at those words, some cars have 24 photos, some have 9. Some have 24 photos and video, some have no video, no photos. And again, the whole game is to get VDPs. So, you're competing on that SRP page for a VDP, and that photo bait is enticement. Next question.
Okay, and this looks to be our last question, also from Joshua. How can I track my matrices on Auto Trader?
How can you track your matrices? And I'm not sure which matrix you're referring to there. So I'll give that, I'll make a couple of closing remarks, and Joshua, if you are in a position to type clarification on that question, I'd be happy to answer it on the seminar, or if not, feel free to email me. But what I'll do in the meantime is I'll put my telephone number and email up here, and I'll tell you a couple of things in closing. Number one, for those of you who are vAuto clients, it's absolutely imperative that you understand and you work with this stuff, and much of these metrics are embedded in your merchandising tool, and for that matter, throughout the vAuto application. In fact, you have the ability in the vAuto application to configure your screen so that you can put SRPs and VDPs for every vehicle you can look at every moment. And it's really fascinating to see certain cars that, in spite of the fact that they've got a low price, don't have many VDPs or SRPs. Some cars will get a lot of VDPs and SRPs with a high price relative to the competitors. So if you don't have your vAuto system configured to bring that merchandising of VDPs and SRPs into your inventory, I would ask you to do that, or get a hold of your performance manager and have them do that. For those of you who are not vAuto users, these same principles obviously still apply, and the same data is all available to you. It's on the back end of your sites of Cars.com and Auto Trader, and it's there. So go work with your, go there, work with your rep, understand it. And I also tell you that I am perfectly happy to spend as much time with any user, irrespective of whether they use the vAuto software or not. My passion is to teach this stuff, and I'm certain, that if it works and it's right, my other interests get taken care of. So, I'm absolutely thrilled to take emails, calls, answer questions for any user, irrespective of whether they use vAuto or not. I'd be happy to do that. If you want to review the scoring system, I'd be happy to go over that with you. And the happiest calls I get are ones who are saying, hey, let me send you my numbers, or and talk to me. What do you think I ought to be doing, or what can or should I be doing? Happy to do that. And there's absolutely no charge, and there's no obligation whatsoever that you buy anything from me. Susan, do we have any clarification on that?
We do, and we have 2 additional questions. From Joshua, he says, sorry, I was talking about price matrix for my entire inventory, not just by single unit. Same question for the demand matrix.
Yeah, I have to tell you that, I often get asked the question, what should my pricing matrix look like? And I'm a little bit reluctant to suggest that there's one model that fits all, because there are certain circumstances that prevail in every market that justifies some different approaches. But generally speaking, and this is just generally speaking, I would like to see your inventory matrix be broken up into 15-day age buckets, Joshua. And again, generally speaking, I think that what I've come to understand to be the sweet spot in the market in terms of pricing, where you could expect that internet to really perform for you as opposed to performing against you, is in the first 15 days or so, maybe 97, 98%, and then in each successive 15-day bucket, drop it down about 2%. So if you started at 98 for the first 15 days, second 15-day bucket, 96, third 94, 92, 90, and so on. But obviously there are going to be some adjustments to that. Now, on demand index, that's a little bit trickier, because the demand index is published by Auto Trader in their scarcity report, and Cars.com in their CarStar report. Those reports are rankings of vehicles based on makes and models, not a high degree of specificity, which is something that I would like to see done in the future, and I've encouraged them to do in the future. So I don't know how to answer the demand index on the matrix side, but I will tell you in terms of market day supply, that which vAuto reports, this is always going to be a fluctuating number depending on market conditions. But I would say that if you could have average market day supplies of your inventory across all buckets being in the high 60s to low to mid 70 market day supply, I would say that you're doing pretty well.
And we have a note here from Jennifer, one of the Auto Trader reps. She says, for Josh, dealer scorecard from an autotrader.com rep would be the report you are looking for. You should call your autotrader.com rep.
Yeah, Auto Trader, thank you, Jennifer. Auto Trader has a very powerful report that they call the scorecard, and the Auto Trader rep would like to deliver that to you in person, because there's so much information there that it can easily be overwhelming, and it's so powerful, and the reps are completely trained on how to explain and communicate and help you manage with that data. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, and 2 other questions. First one from Michael Budd. How do we get the software tool that shows the quality of our listings?
The quality of your listings is a qualitative, obviously not a quantitative assessment. So I think maybe what you're referring to is a tool that I'm sorry, I think I understand the question. There's vAuto has a tool in its merchandising bundle called Virtual View. And if you're a vAuto client, Michael, that's what you want, is the Virtual View. Now, if you're not a vAuto client, I know this is true on Auto Trader, and I don't know firsthand on Cars.com, although I suspect it probably would be true on the back end of their sites. They have similar tools that allow you to evaluate the quality of your inventory on their site. So, it's available, I guess, in a number of different places. And you want to know something? It's something that everybody who has any degree of responsibility for used car performance in the dealership, from dealer down to used car manager, should look at every day. Just as you would never, go to work on any given day and not look at your used car inventory and say, is that inventory displayed sharp or well? I mean, it's just that critical.
Okay, and he clarified a little bit. It was the software you showed that showed if it had pictures, descriptions, etc. So he is talking about our backend tool.
Yes, that is the vAuto virtual view. But again, I want to tell you that that the third-party sites have an equivalent of that tool for their data on their site. That virtual view aggregates it across many different sites, but it's attainable elsewhere as well.
Next question, when will you have the vAuto app for Android?
Oh, good question. I'm glad you asked that. I just checked on that this morning, and we're testing it right now. So I would say very conservatively, we will have that within 30 days. It's in testing right now, so testing is the last phase before it goes out to production. So it's actually created. It's working in our lab right now, and we're just doing the thing we need to do before we release it. So we're very close.
And the final question, where is the virtual view that comes from Jim Lindeberg?
Thanks, Jim, for the question. If you're a vAuto client, it is a sub-menu item on the main menu under merchandising. So you would have like home, inventory, stocking, appraising, merchandising, and if you hover over merchandising, it shows you sub-bullet, sub-menu, and virtual view is one of those. And that virtual view, that merchandising data, as I mentioned earlier, can be configured into as an overlay to your inventory page. So I've actually really have come to appreciate and respect the value of pricing vehicles today, not just based on identically other competing vehicles in the market and their market day supply, but also in addition to those two data points, what sort of activity, how many SRPs and VDPs the cars are getting. It's really fascinating. So, integration of that data is very powerful in terms of pricing cars, where they need to be priced, not lower, not higher, but where they need to be priced, where the action's at in the market. Any other questions, Sue?
No, that was it.
All right, well, again, I want to say thank you to everyone. Recording of this will be posted on the vAuto website starting this Wednesday under the tools and resources. Feel free to reach out, call, email me at any time. I'll be happy to spend as much time as you'd like. And again, no obligation that you be a vAuto client, no obligation to pay me anything. It's all, when you win, we all win. So thank you, and look forward to future seminars, and we'll post those on my blog and on the vAuto site, dalepollak.com and vAuto.com. Everybody have a nice day, and thank you again.